The roast had been done for nearly an hour, resting beneath foil that trapped more steam than hope. The kitchen smelled rich garlic, thyme, browned butter, but the house itself felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. Elinor stood at the counter, smoothing the edge of a folded napkin with her thumb. She had pressed them that morning, even misted them with a light floral spray she only used on holidays. Muscle memory was a powerful thing. 3 plates were arranged on the dining table. 3 glasses, 3 name cards, handwritten in looping ink she'd practiced decades ago. She knew she didn't need them anymore, but tradition had always been her quiet way of believing things would return to how they were. The clock on the wall clicked past 6, then 6:30. She checked her phone, not anxiously, just routinely. No messages, no missed calls, only a calendar alert she had set weeks ago, family dinner 6 p.m. At 6:47, her screen lit up. It wasn't a greeting, no apology, no running late. It was a screenshot. Elinor sat down slowly, the chair scraping against the floor louder than it should have been. The image showed a group chat, one she wasn't part of, names she recognized instantly. Messages stacked casually, carelessly. She'll probably still cook. Same thing every year. Let her play hostess. A laughing reaction hovered beneath one of the messages, bright and cruel in its simplicity. Her hand didn't tremble. It surprised her how steady she felt. She placed the phone face down beside her plate and stared at the nearest candle. The flame wavered, bent sideways, then steadied again. Even fire knew how to adapt. She served herself. A little meat. A spoon of potatoes. Carrots arranged neatly, sprinkled with herbs no one would compliment. She chewed, swallowed, and realized the food tasted like nothing at all. After a few bites, she stopped. She typed one message back to the sender of the screenshot. "Thank you for telling me." No response came. Elinor stood, blew out the candles one by one, and left the dishes exactly where they were. No covering, no saving, no pretending tomorrow would fix it. As she turned off the dining room light, the table remained set, perfect, untouched, and finally honest. And somewhere deep inside her chest, something long patient began to shift. She didn't know it yet, but that screenshot wasn't the betrayal, it was the permission. Morning arrived gently, which felt unfair. Sunlight crept across the dining room floor, catching the edge of the table Elinor had avoided the night before. She paused in the hallway, coffee mug warming her palms, and considered turning back. Instead, she stepped forward. Avoidance had shaped too many years already. Nothing had changed overnight. The plates still sat where she left them, food untouched, herbs wilting slightly at the edges. It didn't smell bad. It smelled suspended, like a moment that refused to move on without her permission. She cleared nothing. Instead, she opened windows. Cold air rushed in, sharp and honest, cutting through the heaviness. Curtains fluttered. The house responded like it had been waiting for instruction. Her phone buzzed against the counter. A message this time, not from her sons. "I'm really sorry," it read. "I didn't think they'd joke like that. I shouldn't have sent it, but you deserve to know." Elinor stared at the name. Mara, her niece. The only one who still spoke to her without obligation. She typed back slowly. "You didn't hurt me. It wasn't true, but it was precise. You clarified things." She set the phone down and walked through the house, room by room, closing doors that no longer needed to stay open. The first bedroom still held trophies and framed photos, frozen in teenage triumphs. The second smelled faintly of cologne that hadn't been used in years. The third was the neatest, books aligned, furniture untouched, like its owner expected to return any day now. Elinor closed each door with care. Not anger, finality. Back in the dining room, she folded the napkins again. Once, twice. Then she placed them in the drawer beneath the table, resting on linens she hadn't used since her husband passed. Her hands moved automatically, but her chest felt heavier with every motion, as if each habit weighed something now. The phone buzzed again. This time, a missed call, then another. She didn't check who it was, she already knew. Instead, she crossed into the small office at the back of the house and knelt in front of the filing cabinet. The bottom drawer resisted at first, then slid open with a familiar scrape. Inside were folders she hadn't touched in years. Labels in her handwriting. Dates, signatures, proof she hadn't forgotten. She had postponed. Elinor sat back on her heels and let out a slow breath, not grief, not rage, but resolve. the kind that forms quietly after something breaks clean through denial. She pulled out a legal pad and wrote one word at the top of the page: enough. Then she began listing names, numbers, steps. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling bare branches against the window. Elinor didn't flinch. For the first time in a long while, the house wasn't waiting. It was watching. By noon, she would make the first call, and nothing about this family would ever function the same way again. Elinor waited until the kettle finished boiling before she made the first call. Not because she needed tea, but because she wanted the pause. For decades, she had acted quickly, jumped in, fixed things, smoothed over gaps before anyone else even noticed them. This time, she let the water scream before silencing it. The number on the notepad looked familiar in a way that made her jaw tighten. A lawyer she hadn't spoken to in years. She remembered his voice, measured, patient, impossible to rush. Back then, she'd found that frustrating. Now, it felt like exactly what she needed. When he answered, she didn't explain the backstory. She didn't offer excuses or emotional framing. She simply said, "I'd like to review my legal exposure and reclaim anything that still bears my name." There was a pause. Then, of course, "Let's start with what you still control." That word, control, landed differently than she expected. The second call went to a bank manager who recognized her instantly. He spoke kindly, asked how her family was. Elinor redirected the conversation without answering. Accounts were reviewed. Authorizations were flagged. Temporary freezes were discussed calmly, professionally, as if they were nothing more than weather adjustments. By the third call, her hands no longer felt heavy. She moved methodically through the list. Titles, loans, co-signatures she'd agreed to during moments of urgency that had somehow stretched into years. Promises that had expired without acknowledgement. Each confirmation felt less like taking something back and more like stepping out from underneath. A weight she hadn't realized was crushing her posture. The phone rang while she was labeling a folder. She glanced at the screen, her eldest. She let it ring. The silence afterward was louder than the ringtone. She noticed how her shoulders stayed relaxed, how her breath didn't hitch the way it usually did when she ignored a call from one of them. There was no panic chasing her pulse, no guilt racing ahead of logic, only space. By early afternoon, the house had changed temperature, not warmer, not colder, just clearer. Elinor opened curtains she'd kept half-drawn for years. Dust floated in the sunlight, visible but harmless. She wiped down the kitchen counters, not out of obligation, but because she wanted clean surfaces to match how her thoughts felt. Another call came, then another. A voicemail followed, confused, polite, edged with the kind of concern that usually meant money had stopped moving somewhere. She didn't listen. Instead, she wrote a final note on the pad: "No explanations today." She folded the paper and placed it beneath the kettle like a quiet promise to herself. Outside, a car passed too slowly. Elinor didn't look up. She had spent too much of her life responding to movement that wasn't meant for her well-being. For the first time, she wasn't bracing for fallout. She was preparing for release. By sunset, they would realize something essential was missing, and it wasn't the money. The knock came just after one. Not sharp, not demanding, measured, hesitant, as if whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they deserved to be heard. Elinor didn't answer right away. She stayed in the kitchen, hands resting on the counter, listening to the house absorb the sound. A second knock followed, softer than the first. She counted to 5, not out of spite but intention, then walked to the door. Through the narrow pane of glass, she saw him shifting his weight, shoulders hunched against the cold. He looked smaller than she remembered, older in a way that had nothing to do with years. She opened the door only partway. "Hi, Mom," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was nearby." She nodded, not an invitation, just acknowledgement. He glanced past her into the house, like he expected to see evidence of dinner still happening somewhere. "I've been calling," he added too quickly. "I know." The quiet stretched. He cleared his throat. "Things have been messy," he said. "Work, the holidays, everything stacking up. We didn't mean for things to get weird." Elinor studied him, not critically, just honestly. He smelled faintly of cold air and impatience. His hands were shoved into his pockets, the way he used to stand when he wanted something but didn't want to ask outright. "We already had dinner," she said, his brow furrowed. "Wait, what?" "Christmas," she clarified. "It already happened." He laughed once uncertain. "You know what I mean." I do. Another silence, this one heavier. So, are we rescheduling? He asked. Maybe this weekend? She didn't answer right away. She noticed how he hadn't apologized, how he hadn't asked how she was. How the question assumed continuity, as if the night before was a scheduling error instead of a decision. No, she said. The word surprised him. He blinked. No, he repeated, like he was trying to translate it. She stepped back slightly and placed her hand on the door. Not everything gets a redo. His mouth opened, then closed. He searched her face for softness, familiarity, leverage. Whatever he expected to find wasn't there. Well, he muttered, I guess I'll talk to the others. She nodded once. He waited another beat, then stepped back onto the porch. No hug, no goodbye, just confusion trailing him down the steps. Elinor closed the door gently and rested her forehead against the wood for a moment, not in grief, but recalibration. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. A new message. Another name, she didn't read it. Instead, she turned off the porch light, even though it was still daylight. That was the first visit, but it wouldn't be the last, and the next one wouldn't come with excuses. The second knock came the following morning. It was earlier this time, just after the sun reached the front steps. Elinor noticed the car first, parked too close to the curb, engine still warm. Whoever it was hadn't planned to stay long. That alone told her everything. She didn't rush. She rinsed her cup, dried her hands, and walked to the door at her own pace. He stood there holding something, flowers, hastily chosen, still wrapped in grocery store plastic. His hair was combed, jacket zipped, eyes alert in the way people get when they arrive with a strategy instead of sincerity. I brought these, he said, lifting the bouquet slightly, like proof of effort. Elinor didn't take them. Oh, he added quickly, adjusting his grip. I didn't know if you... It's fine, she said. You can keep them. That unsettled him more than anger would have. He stepped inside without asking, stopping just past the mat. He didn't sit, he hovered. People who expected forgiveness often did that, never fully settling, always ready to retreat if the room turned cold. Look, he began, I know things got out of hand. The group chat thing, it wasn't meant for you to see. But you said it, she replied calmly. He blinked. That's not what I meant. I know, she said again. He exhaled sharply and shifted tactics. Clarissa shouldn't have sent that. She blew it up. There it was, not remorse, not accountability, just redirection. Elinor walked past him into the kitchen. She opened the fridge, removed a wrapped container, and placed it into a paper bag. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. I made pie, she said. You should take it, it's still good. He stared at the bag like it was a test. Are we okay? She handed it to him. We're clear, she said. That word landed harder than he expected. He took the bag, nodded once, and left without another question. No argument, no apology, just a quiet retreat. Minutes later, her phone lit up again. This time, she answered. Mom, a voice said, strained. Something's wrong with my account. She listened, let him talk, let the silence do its work. I can't access the truck payment, he continued, and the card declined at the station. Yes, she said, a pause. Then yes, I removed my authorization, she clarified. What? Why would you? Because it was mine. The line went quiet. She hung up before he could respond. Elinor set the phone down and felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest, not guilt, not triumph, but certainty. They were beginning to understand. By evening, every one of them would realize the same thing. Nothing had been taken from them, but everything had changed. By late afternoon, the phone had stopped ringing. Not because the problem was solved, but because panic had replaced confusion. Elinor recognized the pattern. It was the same silence that followed childhood accidents, the moment right after the fall, before the crying began. She welcomed it. She spent the early hours doing ordinary things. Laundry, dusting shelves she rarely touched, watering the plant by the window that always survived despite neglect. Every task felt deliberate, grounding her in the present instead of the years she'd spent bracing for other people's needs. Around 3, she finally listened to the voicemails. One voice shook. Another tried to sound casual and failed. A third was clipped, frustrated, already rehearsing blame. None of them asked how she was. None of them said they were sorry. Every message circled the same truth without naming it. Something they relied on had vanished, and they wanted it restored. She deleted them all. At 4:30, A car pulled into the driveway and stayed there longer than necessary. Alina watched from the living room window, unseen. Two figures sat inside, arguing quietly. She could tell by the gestures, sharp hands, rigid shoulders. When one finally stepped out, the other stayed behind, staring straight ahead like a sentry guarding wounded pride. The knock was louder this time. Alina didn't open the door. She stood behind it, close enough to hear the breath on the other side. "Mom," a voice called, strained. "We need to talk." No apology, no question. Just urgency dressed up as concern. "We're not mad," the voice added quickly. "We just don't understand what's happening." Alina rested her palm against the door. The wood was cool, solid, unmoving. "That's not true," she said through it. "You understand exactly what's happening. You just don't like it." Silence followed. Then, quieter, "You're overreacting." That did it. She stepped back and spoke clearly, not raising her voice, not softening it either. "I'm responding," she said. "There's a difference." Footsteps shuffled. Someone sighed. A car door opened and closed. The engine started, cut off, then started again. They left without another word. Alina waited until the sound faded completely before moving again. Her heart was steady. Her hands weren't shaking. That surprised her most of all. She returned to the office and opened the folder she'd prepared earlier. Documents neatly stacked, dates highlighted, appointments confirmed. The work was already in motion. There was nothing left to explain. As evening settled in, Alina lit a single lamp instead of the overhead lights. The house felt quieter, but not emptier. Intentional. Like a space finally arranged for the person who lived in it. She poured herself a glass of water and raised it slightly, alone, not in celebration but acknowledgement. This was the point of no return. And she felt ready for what came next. The attorney's office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, neutral, efficient, unemotional. Alina appreciated that. No one here asked how she was feeling. No one tilted their head sympathetically or softened their tone. This was a place where facts mattered more than history. She sat across the desk with her coat folded neatly in her lap as the attorney flipped through the documents. Yellow tabs marked places that required initials. Red ones meant signatures. The process was methodical, almost boring. Good, Alina thought. Change shouldn't always feel dramatic. "Everything listed here is still legally yours," the attorney said, tapping the stack lightly. "You were never removed from ownership or responsibility." "I know," Alina replied. A brief pause followed, not judgment, just recognition. People didn't usually sit so calmly while dismantling decades of informal arrangements. They began with the largest item first. A property transfer. Clean, final, no loopholes. The building would move into the hands of a nonprofit within weeks. Alina signed where indicated, her pen gliding easily across the page. She felt no hesitation. The idea that something she once financed out of obligation would now serve people who actually needed it felt right. Next came the loan releases. The attorney explained the consequences carefully, but Alina had already accepted them. Assets would be sold, accounts separated, responsibility redistributed to those who had relied on it without gratitude. When they reached the final page, the attorney slid it forward gently. "This one changes your will," she said. "Once filed, it replaces the previous version entirely." Alina didn't ask to reread it. She had already done that at home, in the quiet hours before dawn, when memories tried to argue for sentimentality. She signed. No poetry, no explanations, just clarity. When it was done, the attorney gathered the papers and stood. "We'll handle the rest." Outside, the sky had turned pale and wide, the kind of gray that made everything feel open instead of closed. Alina took a deep breath and realized she felt lighter, not relieved exactly, but unburdened. She stopped at the grocery store on the way home, bought bananas with brown spots. Cinnamon, flour, things that didn't need permission to be useful. That afternoon, she baked. The smell filled the house, warm, familiar, grounding. But this time, she didn't imagine who it might attract. She baked because she wanted to. The next morning, she delivered the loaf to a local shelter. The volunteer who accepted it hugged her without asking why she'd come. "Thank you," the woman said simply. And for the first time in a long while, Alina believed the words. That evening, she returned home to several missed calls. She didn't listen. She didn't need to. What she didn't expect was who would reach out next and how different that conversation would feel. The message came late in the afternoon when the house was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum. Elinor noticed the name first. Not one of her sons. She sat at the small kitchen table before opening it as if posture mattered. "I've been thinking about you," the message read. "I hope that's okay. I just wanted to check in." It was Clarissa. No questions disguised as concern. No urgency. Just presence. Elinor read it twice, then once more. Her reply took longer, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wanted the words to come from the right place. "I'm making roast this weekend," she finally typed. "You're welcome to come. Bring anyone kind." She hesitated, then hit send. The reply came quicker than she expected. "We'd love to. Do you want us to bring anything?" That question landed differently than all the others had. It didn't assume, it offered. Elinor stared at the screen, her throat tightening in a way that felt unfamiliar. She typed back, "Just yourselves." Saturday arrived without ceremony. Elinor moved the smaller table into the sunroom, where the light came in soft and generous. She set only 2 places. Real plates, but nothing fancy. No name cards. No performance. She didn't iron napkins. She didn't overthink the menu. The roast cooked a little longer than planned. The potatoes were unevenly mashed. It was imperfect, and somehow that felt like the point. Clarissa arrived with her roommate, a tall woman with flour still dusted on her sleeves and a laugh that came easily. They brought bread and a cheap bottle of sparkling cider that fizzed too fast when opened. They ate slowly, talked about small things, big things, nothing that needed defending. No one checked the time. After they left, Elinor washed the dishes by hand. The kitchen felt warm in a way it hadn't for years, not loud, not crowded, just alive. She dried the last plate and placed it carefully in the cabinet. That was when she noticed the shadows outside. 3 of them. They stretched across the porch boards, long and uneven, moving slightly as voices carried through the door. Not loud enough to hear clearly, but enough to recognize the cadence. Elinor didn't turn off the light. She didn't open the door. She stood still, listening not to the words but to what wasn't there. No apology, no laughter. Just frustration, confusion, entitlement murmuring in low tones. After a while, the shadows shifted. Footsteps retreated. A car door closed. The porch fell quiet again. Elinor exhaled slowly and turned back toward the kitchen, where the air still smelled faintly of rosemary and warmth. She hadn't locked anyone out. She had simply chosen where to stay. And tomorrow, she would decide what kind of future deserved a seat at her table. Weeks passed without announcement. No dramatic apologies arrived. No late-night voicemails cracked open into confessions. Time simply moved forward, the way it always does when no one is pulling it backward by guilt or expectation. The house changed first, not in how it looked, but in how it sounded. Laughter began showing up without warning. Sometimes it came with Clarissa on Sundays, her voice trailing through the hallway as she kicked off her shoes like she belonged there. Other times it arrived with neighbors, friends of friends, people who stayed after dinner not because they needed something, but because they wanted to linger. Elinor noticed the difference immediately. No one asked what dessert cost. No one scanned the room for what they could take with them. No one treated her generosity like a renewable resource. One afternoon, the neighbor's teenage son knocked on her door holding a stack of papers and a look of quiet panic. College applications, essays half-written, deadlines circled too aggressively. "They said you're good at reading things carefully," he told her, hopeful but not demanding. They sat at the table together, papers spread out like a future still flexible enough to be shaped. Elinor didn't correct his grammar first. She asked him why he wanted to leave home. When he answered honestly, she nodded, not to fix it, just to understand. That night, she realized she hadn't thought about her sons all day. Not in avoidance, not in pain, simply absence. When she cooked now, she still made too much. Old instincts didn't disappear overnight, but the plates came back empty, not out of politeness but appetite, real hunger. The kind that didn't apologize for existing. She caught her reflection one evening while clearing the table. Older, yes, softer around the edges, but steadier. Like someone who had finally stopped leaning forward waiting to be needed. Her phone buzzed occasionally. Messages came shorter now, less demanding, some confused, some irritated, none remorseful. She didn't answer. not because she couldn't, but because she no longer needed to explain the boundary she'd already lived into. One evening, she opened the top drawer of her writing desk and pulled out a clean envelope. No address yet, just space. She held it for a moment, then set it aside. There were still decisions ahead. Conversations that might happen someday. Or not, but Alina no longer measured her days by whether someone else showed up. She measured them by how fully she did. The house settled into quiet again, not loneliness, but rest. Alina never did write the letter. The envelope stayed in the desk drawer for weeks, then months, slowly curling at the corners as seasons shifted. At first, she thought the words would come eventually. That one morning she'd wake with the perfect balance of truth and mercy, something that explained everything without reopening wounds. But clarity, she learned, doesn't always arrive as language. Sometimes it arrives as absence. Spring softened the yard. New leaves replaced what winter had stripped bare. Alina spent more time outside now, hands in the soil, dirt beneath her nails grounding her in something honest. Growth didn't ask for justification. It just happened where it was allowed. The calls from her sons slowed, then stopped altogether. Not dramatically, no final argument, no slammed door. Just distance settling in, quiet and complete. She wondered sometimes if they told the story differently among themselves, if she was cast as cold, unforgiving, changed. She didn't correct the narrative. She had spent enough years explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding. Instead, her world filled in other ways. Sunday dinners continued, small, imperfect, warm. Clarissa came often, sometimes alone, sometimes with new faces. The table expanded and contracted naturally, without ceremony. No one assumed a seat belonged to them. Every presence felt chosen. One afternoon, Alina stood in the dining room, the same one that once held 3 untouched plates, and noticed how little it haunted her now. She opened the cabinet and removed the name cards she'd kept out of habit. The ink had faded slightly. She studied them for a moment, then placed them gently into the recycling bin. Not bitterness, completion. That evening, she lit a single candle at the table, not for anyone else, but because she liked the way the flame steadied her thoughts. She ate slowly, savoring the meal, listening to the quiet without flinching. Later, as she prepared for bed, Alina caught her reflection in the mirror again. She smiled, not brightly, not performatively, but with recognition. She looked like someone who belonged to herself. Before turning out the light, she opened the desk drawer one last time and removed the unused envelope. She didn't tear it up. She didn't save it either. She placed it beneath a stack of blank paper, space reserved for whatever came next. Because the truth was simple, and she no longer needed to say it out loud. She hadn't lost her family. She had stopped losing herself. And that, finally, felt like coming home.